My name is Elena Rosewood and I'm 28 years old. At the reading of my grandmother's will, I learned that being the forgotten granddaughter sometimes has its advantages. The mahogany conference table stretched between us like a battleground. My mother, Victoria, sat perfectly poised in her Chanel suit, her manicured fingers drumming against her patent leather purse. My father, Richard, checked his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. And my sister Sophia, golden-haired, green-eyed, perpetually radiant Sophia, examined her reflection in her phone screen, adjusting her lipstick with the confidence of someone who had never doubted she deserved the world. Me? I sat in the corner chair, the one that wobbled slightly when you leaned back, wearing my only good dress and feeling like an understudy who'd accidentally wandered onto the main stage. "The will is quite straightforward," announced Mr. Harrison, Grandmother Margot's attorney, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "To my daughter Victoria and her family, I leave my Park Avenue penthouse and its contents." Mother's smile was radiant. Father nodded approvingly. Sophia clapped her hands together like she was at a theater performance. "To my granddaughter Sophia," Mr. Harrison continued, "I leave my art collection, including the Monet, the Picasso sketches, and the Van Gogh drawing, valued at approximately $12 million. Sophia actually squealed. Mother reached over to squeeze her hand. Father's chest puffed with pride. I stared at my lap, calculating how long it would take me to save enough for a security deposit on a studio apartment now that I'd have to move out of the family guest house. Probably 6 months if I picked up extra shifts at the museum where I worked as a restoration assistant. "And finally," Mr. Harrison said, his voice taking on a different tone, "to my granddaughter Elena, I leave my estate in Provence, France, including the vineyard, the restoration workshop, and all associated properties and accounts." The room went silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence, but the kind that feels like the air has been sucked out through a straw. If you've ever been betrayed by those you loved most, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're ready to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of manipulation. I looked up, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Mr. Harrison's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Your grandmother's estate in Provence, Miss Rosewood. Chateau Margaux, with its 30-acre vineyard, fully equipped art restoration facility, and accompanying financial accounts. She's also included a letter specifically for you." Sophia's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. "That's impossible. Grandmother barely knew Elena. She hardly ever visited, never called." "Because you never told me when she called," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Mother's head snapped toward me. "Excuse me?" Something shifted inside me, like a door I'd kept locked finally creaking open. "You never told me when grandmother called. Just like you never told me when she invited me to visit. Just like you forgot to mention she was sick until after the funeral." Father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Elena, this is hardly the time." "When is the time?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "When is it ever the time to talk about how you've spent my entire life making me feel like I was taking up space that belonged to someone else?" Mr. Harrison cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps I should read Mrs. Dubois's letter to Elena?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He unfolded a piece of cream-colored paper, thick and expensive, covered in grandmother's elegant handwriting. "My dearest Elena," he began, and something in my chest loosened at those words. "If you are hearing this, then I am no longer there to tell you in person what I should have said years ago. You were never the problem, ma chérie. You were the gift they were too blind to see." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. "I watched them dim your light from the time you were small. I saw how your mother redirected conversations when you spoke about your art history studies. I noticed how your father changed the subject when you mentioned your work at the museum. I observed how your sister claimed credit for your insights, your ideas, your discoveries." Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "But I also saw you, truly saw you, during our secret phone calls when you thought no one was listening. I heard about your thesis on Renaissance restoration techniques. I learned about your volunteer work teaching art classes to refugees. I discovered that you had inherited not just my love for art, but my understanding that beauty and history deserve to be preserved and protected. My hands were shaking now. The estate in Provence is not just property, Elena. It is your sanctuary. The workshop contains pieces I've been collecting for decades, works that need the kind of patient, skilled restoration that only someone who truly understands art can provide. The vineyard provides income, yes, but more than that, it provides purpose. You will understand when you arrive. Mr. Harrison paused, then continued reading. I have left detailed instructions with my estate manager, Jean-Claude Moreau. He has been expecting you. The cottage is ready. Your studio is equipped. Your new life is waiting. All you have to do is be brave enough to claim it. The letter wasn't finished, but Mr. Harrison looked up at me. There's more, but it's quite personal. Perhaps you'd prefer to read the rest privately. I nodded, taking the letter with trembling fingers. Sophia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous. Grandmother was clearly not in her right mind. Elena doesn't know anything about running a vineyard or managing an estate. She's never even been to France. Actually, I said softly, I speak fluent French. I minored in it in college. But you wouldn't know that because you've never asked about my education. Mother's face had gone rigid. Elena, your grandmother was eccentric toward the end. She made some questionable decisions. Like leaving her estate to the granddaughter who actually listened to her stories about French art restoration instead of the one who only called when she needed money for shopping trips to Milan. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Father stood up, his face flushed. That's enough. Elena, you're being incredibly ungrateful. This family has provided for you, supported you. Supported me? I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. You mean like when you forgot to pick me up from the airport when I came back from my study abroad program? Or when you scheduled Sophia's graduation party on the same day as my thesis defense and acted like I was being unreasonable for being disappointed? You're being dramatic, Sophia said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Am I? Tell me, Sophia, what's my job? She hesitated. You work at a museum. Doing what? Another pause. You do something with old paintings. I'm a restoration specialist. I have a master's degree in art conservation from NYU. I've been published in 3 academic journals. I've restored works that are now hanging in the Metropolitan Museum. But you don't know any of that because you've never once asked about my work. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. If I may, there are some documents that need to be signed, and flight arrangements have already been made for Miss Rosewood, should she choose to accept her inheritance. Flight arrangements? I asked. Your grandmother was quite thorough. She believed you would want to see the estate as soon as possible. There's a ticket for tomorrow evening's flight to Marseille, first class. Jean-Claude will meet you at the airport. I stared at him, then at the letter in my hands, then at my family's shocked faces. I'll take it, I said. All of it. The flight to Marseille felt like traveling through a dream. I'd never flown first class before. Mother and father always said it was an unnecessary expense, even though they flew first class themselves. They just booked me in economy, usually with a connection that added 4 hours to the journey. But this time I sank into a leather seat wider than my desk chair at home, sipped champagne that tasted like stars, and read the rest of grandmother's letter by the soft overhead light. Elena, ma chérie, I know this must feel overwhelming. Change always does. But I want you to understand something that took me too many years to learn. You do not owe your family your silence. You do not owe them your smallness. You do not owe them a life spent apologizing for taking up space. Your mother was my daughter and I loved her, but I also saw how she treated you. It broke my heart every time I watched her dismiss your achievements or redirect attention to Sophia when you were speaking. I should have intervened more forcefully, and for that I am sorry. But now I can give you what I should have given you years ago, permission to flourish without asking anyone's approval. The estate comes with responsibilities, yes, but also with freedom. Jean-Claude knows the vineyard business inside and out. He's been my manager for 15 years. The restoration workshop has clients from all over Europe who have been waiting for someone with your skills. You will not be starting from nothing. You will be stepping into a life I've been preparing for you. There is one more thing. In the workshop, you will find a painting wrapped in blue cloth in the back storage room. It has been waiting for you. When you see it, you will understand why I could never let them make you invisible. Live boldly, Elena. Live like the masterpiece you are. Asterisk all my love, Grandmere Margot. I cried somewhere over the Atlantic, quietly, with my face turned toward the window so the flight attendant wouldn't see. Not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in my life, someone had seen me clearly and decided I was worth investing in. Jean-Claude Moreau was exactly what central casting would order for a French estate manager. Silver-haired, wearing a pressed linen shirt despite the early morning hour, holding a hand-lettered sign with my name on it. His smile was warm and genuine as he took my suitcase and led me to a vintage Citroën that looked like it belonged in a movie. Mademoiselle Elena, he said in accented English, I am so very happy to finally meet you. Madame Margot, she spoke of you constantly. She did? Mais oui. She was so proud of your work, your studies. She has every article you published framed in her study. Did you not know? I shook my head, throat tight. Ah well. There is much you will discover. The drive to Chateau Margaux is beautiful this time of year. Are you ready to see your new home? The drive took us through countryside that looked like it had been painted by Cézanne himself. Rolling hills covered in lavender, ancient stone walls dividing properties that had probably been family holdings for centuries, cypress trees standing like exclamation points against the blue sky. And then we crested a hill and I saw it. Chateau Margaux wasn't a castle, despite the name. It was a large stone farmhouse, probably dating from the 18th century, with shutters painted the soft blue-green of sea glass. Grapevines stretched in neat rows down the hillside behind it, heavy with late summer fruit. To the left of the main house stood a converted barn, the workshop, I assumed, with large windows facing north for consistent light. It's beautiful, I whispered. Jean-Claude smiled. Wait until you see inside. The house was furnished with antiques that had been chosen for comfort rather than show. Worn leather armchairs, a kitchen table scarred by decades of use, bookshelves lined with art history texts in French and English. It felt lived in, loved, completely different from my parents' sterile Park Avenue lifestyle. But it was the workshop that took my breath away. The barn had been completely converted into a state-of-the-art restoration facility. Easels, work tables, microscopes for examining paint layers, climate-controlled storage areas, every tool and chemical I could possibly need. It was better equipped than the conservation lab at the Met. Madame Margot, she spent 3 years preparing this for you, Jean-Claude said. She consulted with experts, read your papers to understand your methods. Everything here is chosen specifically for the way you work. I ran my fingers along the edge of a workbench, overwhelmed. How did she know I would come? She did not know. But she had hope. And she wanted to be ready. He led me to the back storage room and pointed to a cloth-covered easel in the corner. She said you would want to see this first. With trembling hands, I pulled away the blue cloth. It was a self-portrait I'd painted during my senior year of college, an assignment I'd been particularly proud of, though I'd never shown it to my family. Somehow, grandmother had acquired it. But that wasn't what made me gasp. The painting had been damaged at some point, a long tear across the canvas, some areas where the paint had flaked away. It needed restoration. Attached to the frame was a note in grandmother's handwriting. Some things become more beautiful after they've been broken and carefully mended. You are ready to heal yourself, ma chérie. I sank into the chair beside the easel and finally let myself cry properly. Deep, shaking sobs that felt like releasing pressure I'd been holding for years. The first month at Chateau Margaux passed in a blur of discovery and adjustment. Jean-Claude introduced me to the vineyard workers, all of whom had been expecting me for months. They showed me the grape varieties grandmother had been cultivating, the sustainable farming methods she'd implemented, the small but profitable operation she'd built over the past decade. Madame Margot, she said you would understand the importance of preserving what is valuable, explained Marie, the head of the vineyard crew. She said you would not change things just to change them. Marie was a woman in her 50s with hands stained permanently purple from years of harvest work, but her knowledge of viticulture was encyclopedic. She walked me through the rows of Grenache and Syrah grapes, explaining how grandmother had gradually converted the vineyard to biodynamic farming principles. She believed that wine, like art, should express its true nature without artificial enhancement, Marie told me as we examined clusters heavy with fruit ready for harvest. Each vine has its own personality, its own way of responding to the seasons. Our job is to listen and support, not to force. The philosophy felt familiar. In restoration work, I'd learned that the best results came from understanding what the artist originally intended and working with the painting's natural aging process rather than against it. Grandmother had somehow intuited that I would appreciate this parallel. The workshop clients, meanwhile, had been more than patient. A small Cezanne watercolor that needed cleaning, a 17th-century family portrait with extensive damage, a medieval manuscript with faded illuminations, work that would challenge me and allow me to grow professionally in ways I'd never imagined possible. Each piece told a story beyond its artistic merit. The Cezanne belonged to a family who had hidden it during World War II, rolling it carefully and burying it in their garden. The portrait was of a woman who had commissioned it for her daughter's wedding, but the daughter had died of plague before the ceremony. The manuscript contained recipes for pigments used by medieval illuminators, knowledge that had been nearly lost to time. Working on these pieces felt like archaeology of the soul. Under microscopic examination, I could see the artist's individual brushstrokes, the texture of the canvas they'd chosen, sometimes even fingerprints left in wet paint centuries ago. Each restoration session was a conversation across time with someone who had cared enough about beauty to preserve it for future generations. I established a routine, mornings in the vineyard, learning about the business side of my inheritance, afternoons in the workshop, evenings on the terrace with a glass of wine from my own grapes, reading or video calling with other restoration specialists around the world. But it was more than just routine. It was a complete reimagining of what life could be. In New York, I'd lived in a constant state of apology. Sorry for being too quiet at family dinners, sorry for not being as charming as Sophia, sorry for having interests that didn't align with my parents' social aspirations. Here, every aspect of my daily existence felt intentional and valued. The local community welcomed me with a warmth I hadn't expected. The baker, Monsieur Dubois, saved me the best croissants each morning and asked about my restoration projects with genuine interest. The postwoman, Claudette, delivered packages of art supplies with theatrical flourishes and updates on village gossip. Even the teenager who worked at the hardware store knew about my work and proudly told customers that the American artist lived up the hill. It was the most peaceful I'd ever felt. 3 weeks into my stay, I received my first commission from outside grandmother's established client base. Dr. Amélie Laurent from the Musée d'Orsay contacted me about a Degas pastel that had been damaged in shipping. The work was too delicate to transport to Paris for restoration, and she wondered if I might be willing to travel to their facility. Instead, I invited her to Chateau Margaux. Dr. Laurent arrived on a Wednesday morning, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, carrying the Degas in a custom transport case that probably cost more than my car. She walked through my workshop with the careful eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating conservation facilities. "This is remarkable," she said, running her finger along the edge of my analysis table. "Your grandmother consulted with our head conservator when designing this space. The lighting system alone represents the latest technology." We spent the morning examining the Degas together. The damage was significant, a tear across the center of the composition and several areas where the pastel had been abraded. But it was reparable with patience and the right techniques. "I must be honest, Mademoiselle Rosewood," Dr. Laurent said as we broke for lunch. When your grandmother first mentioned her granddaughter who would someday take over this facility, I was skeptical. Many wealthy collectors imagine their family members have talents they do not possess. But your approach to this piece, your understanding of Degasse's pastel techniques, you have studied with serious people. Professor Martinez at NYU, I said. She trained under someone who had worked directly with conservators who knew Degasse personally. Ah, Carmen Martinez. I know her work well. She only accepts the most promising students. Dr. Laurent smiled. Your grandmother was right to have faith in you. That afternoon, as I began the delicate process of consolidating the loose pastel particles, Dr. Laurent watched with the focused attention of someone evaluating a potential collaborator. We have been looking for someone to handle conservation work for pieces too fragile to travel, she said eventually. The insurance requirements, the transport stress, it would be much better to have a qualified conservator who could work on site with proper equipment. Would you be interested in such an arrangement? I looked up from the microscope, hardly believing what I was hearing. The Musée d'Orsay wanted to work with me directly. It was the kind of professional recognition I'd dreamed of but never thought I'd achieve, especially not living in rural Provence. Yes. Absolutely. Dr. Laurent laughed at my obvious excitement. Excellent. I will speak with our director. But first, let me see how you handle this Degasse. Talent must always be proven through work, not words. My family called, of course. Mother, predictably, was appalled that I'd actually moved to France on a whim. Father wanted to know about property values and tax implications. Sophia asked if I was playing house and when I'd be coming home to my real life. I stopped answering their calls after the third week. But I did start a blog. It began as a way to document my work for professional purposes, but it evolved into something more personal. I wrote about the process of restoring not just paintings, but my own sense of self-worth. I shared photos of the vineyard, the workshop, my progress on various pieces. I wrote about what it felt like to wake up each morning knowing I didn't have to apologize for existing. The response was overwhelming. Other art restoration specialists reached out to collaborate. Wine enthusiasts asked about visiting the vineyard. Most surprisingly, I heard from other women who recognized themselves in my story of family neglect and the journey towards self-reclamation. One comment from a reader named Sarah in Portland particularly stayed with me. Reading your blog feels like getting permission to want more for myself. Thank you for showing that it's possible to choose your own family. I'd been in Provence for 2 months when Dr. Catherine Dubois contacted me. She was a professor at the Sorbonne, she explained in her email, and she'd been following my work through the blog and my professional publications. She had a proposition. Would I be interested in developing a program for young artists who wanted to learn restoration techniques? Many students are interested in conservation, she wrote, but they lack access to hands-on experience with quality equipment and mentorship. Your facility at Chateau Margaux would be perfect for an intensive summer program. We could offer university credit, attract international students, create something quite special. The idea excited me more than anything had in years. I spent a week developing a proposal, a 6-week program combining technical restoration training with art history, business skills for freelance conservators, and personal development workshops for young women in the arts. I called it the Margaux Foundation Summer Program. Dr. Dubois loved the concept. Within a month, we had approval from the university, initial funding from several arts organizations, and a waiting list of students eager to apply. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. I was working late in the studio one evening in November, carefully cleaning a damaged Monet sketch, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Elena? It's Sophia. I almost dropped my brush. We hadn't spoken since I'd left New York. Hi, Sophia. How did you get this number? I called the estate manager. Listen, I need to tell you something. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less certain than I'd ever heard it. Okay. I've been reading your blog. I waited. And I think I owe you an apology. Actually, I know I do. I set down my brush and sat down heavily in the nearest chair. I was horrible to you growing up, she continued. I see that now. I was so used to being the center of attention, and whenever you accomplished something or had an idea, I felt threatened. So I made sure you didn't get recognition for it. Sophia. No, let me finish. I need to say this. The article you wrote about restoration techniques for water-damaged paintings? The one that got published in Art and Conservation Quarterly? I told our parents it was probably just beginner's luck when they mentioned it. And your thesis presentation that I said would be boring so they didn't need to attend? I knew it wasn't boring. I knew it was brilliant. I was just jealous. I couldn't speak. And when grandmother called looking for you, I did intercept those calls. I told her you were too busy with your new sophisticated life to talk to family. I told her you'd said the vineyard sounded quaint but impractical. Why? I whispered. Because I was afraid she liked you better. Because you were smart and talented and interesting, and I was just pretty and charming. I thought if I could make you smaller, I would seem bigger by comparison. Tears were running down my face. I know this doesn't fix anything, Sophia said. And I know you have every right to never forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. You weren't the problem. I was. We sat in silence for a long moment. Thank you, I finally said, for telling me. I saw the announcement about your summer program. It sounds incredible. It's a start. Elena? Are you happy there? I looked around the workshop, at the easel where my restored self-portrait now hung, at the windows showing the vineyard bathed in moonlight, at the life I'd built from nothing but my grandmother's faith and my own determination. Yes, I said. I really am. The first Margot Foundation summer program launched the following June with 12 students from 8 countries. We worked on everything from 16th-century panel paintings to contemporary pieces damaged by floods or fires. The students lived in converted cottages on the property, learned about winemaking from Marie's crew, and spent evenings on the terrace discussing art, history, and their dreams for the future. The program exceeded all my expectations. Each student brought their own perspective and skills, creating a collaborative environment that pushed everyone to grow. Yuki from Japan specialized in traditional East Asian painting conservation and taught us about mounting silk scrolls. Marco from Italy had worked with fresco restoration and shared techniques for stabilizing wall paintings. Anna from Russia was an expert in icon restoration and brought centuries-old methods for working with egg tempera. But it was more than just technical training. During our evening discussions, we talked about the emotional aspects of conservation work, the responsibility of being custodians of cultural heritage, the weight of making decisions that would affect how future generations experience these artworks, the sometimes heartbreaking reality of damage that couldn't be undone. When I first started studying conservation, said Fatima, a student from Morocco who was working on a damaged manuscript, my professor told me that we are not just fixing paintings. We are preserving memories, stories, ways of seeing the world that might otherwise be lost. These conversations reminded me why I'd fallen in love with restoration work in the first place. Each piece we worked on represented someone's attempt to capture something meaningful, beauty, emotion, a moment in time that felt worth preserving. By caring for these works, we were honoring not just the original artists, but everyone who had valued these pieces enough to keep them safe through wars, natural disasters, and the simple passage of time. The students also brought fresh energy to the vineyard. They helped with the harvest that summer, learning about the parallels between caring for grapevines and caring for artworks. Both required patience, attention to detail, and respect for natural processes that couldn't be rushed. During the Harvest Festival that year, the entire village came to Chateau Margaux to celebrate. Tables were set up under the olive trees, laden with food that families had been preparing for days. The mayor made a speech about how the estate had brought new life to the community, not just through employment but through the cultural exchange that the students represented. Madame Margaux would be so proud, Jean-Claude told me as we watched the students dancing with the vineyard workers to music played by a local folk band. She always said this place was meant to bring people together. As the evening wound down and the students were helping clean up, I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. "My family thinks I'm crazy for wanting to work in conservation," Iris was saying to another student. "They keep asking when I'm going to get a real job that makes money." "Mine too," replied James from Australia. "They don't understand that some things are more important than a big salary." "Elena's blog really helped me realize I wasn't alone in feeling that way," said Yuki. "Reading about how she built a life doing work she cared about, even when her family didn't support her, it gave me courage to apply for this program." I slipped away before they noticed me listening, tears blurring my vision. Without meaning to, I'd become the kind of mentor I'd wished for when I was struggling to find my place in the world. On the last night of the program, as we sat around the fire pit with glasses of wine from our vineyard, one of the students, a quiet young woman named Iris from Germany, raised her glass. "To Elena," she said, "for showing us that it's possible to build a life that feels like art." The others joined in the toast, but I was thinking about my grandmother's letter, about the line that had meant the most to me: "You do not owe your family your smallness." After the students left, I found myself both energized and melancholy. The program had been a tremendous success. Already, inquiries were coming in for the following year, and Dr. Du Bois was talking about expanding to include a winter session focused on manuscript conservation. But I missed the daily energy and excitement that the students had brought to the estate. That's when I decided to document everything more thoroughly. I began filming my restoration work, creating detailed videos that showed not just the techniques I used, but the decision-making process behind each choice. I wrote extensively about the history of each piece, the detective work involved in understanding how damage had occurred, the satisfaction of watching a painting reveal its original colors as layers of dirt and discolored varnish were carefully removed. The response was overwhelming. Other conservators around the world began sharing their own techniques and discoveries. Art historians reached out with questions about pieces they were researching. Most meaningfully, young people considering careers in conservation found my work and wrote to say it had helped them understand what the profession actually involved. One email particularly touched me, from a teenager named Sofia in Spain. "I always loved art but thought the only way to work with it was to be an artist myself. I never knew there were people whose job was to save old paintings. Watching your videos made me realize that taking care of beautiful things is just as important as creating them. I'm going to study conservation because of you." The success of the program and the growing international recognition of my work led to opportunities I'd never imagined. The Getty Museum invited me to consult on a major Caravaggio restoration. The Hermitage asked me to develop a training protocol for young conservators. UNESCO inquired about my methods for disaster response in cultural heritage preservation. But perhaps the most unexpected development was a call from Dr. Catherine Du Bois at the Sorbonne. "Elena, I have a proposition that I think will interest you," she said during our video call. "The university is considering establishing a new degree program in cultural heritage conservation, with a focus on combining traditional techniques with modern technology. We need someone to head the program who has both practical experience and teaching ability. Would you consider a position as Director of Conservation Studies?" I was speechless. A professorship at the Sorbonne was the kind of opportunity that most conservators could only dream of. "The position would allow you to maintain your work at Chateau Margaux," she continued. "We envision a program where students split their time between the university in Paris and hands-on work at your facility. Think of it as a formalized version of what you've already created, but with the resources and reach of a major university." I need to think about it," I managed. "Of course. But Elena, I hope you realize what you've accomplished. In just 2 years, you've established yourself as one of the most innovative conservators in Europe. Your grandmother's faith in you was well placed." After the call, I walked out to the vineyard, needing the familiar rhythm of checking the vines to process what had just happened. The evening light was golden, casting long shadows between the rows of grapes that were just beginning to show the first hints of autumn color. I thought about the girl I'd been just 2 years ago, sitting in that wobbling chair at the wheel reading, convinced that my life would always be defined by what I lacked rather than what I had to offer. That version of myself could never have imagined standing here, on land that belonged to me, contemplating a professorship at one of the world's most prestigious universities. But more than the external recognition, what struck me was how fundamentally my relationship with myself had changed. I no longer spent energy trying to convince others of my worth or apologizing for taking up space. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own perspective, to build something meaningful from my particular combination of skills and passions. Later, alone in my studio, I started a new painting. Not a restoration this time, but something entirely my own. A landscape of the vineyard at sunset, but painted in the style of the old masters, using techniques I'd learned from years of studying their work. As I mixed the colors on my palette, I thought about how restoration is really about seeing what something was meant to be and carefully, patiently, helping it become that again. Sometimes that means removing layers of dirt and varnish that have obscured the original vision. Sometimes it means reinforcing areas that have been weakened by time or damage. Always, it requires respect for the artist's original intention while acknowledging that some changes are permanent and must be worked with rather than erased. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career learning to restore damaged artworks, but it had taken my grandmother's gift to teach me how to restore myself. The painting progressed slowly over several weeks. Each evening, I added layers of color, building up the luminous quality that made the old master's work so compelling. The process was meditative, allowing my mind to wander while my hands worked from muscle memory and instinct. One evening, as I was adding details to the cypress trees that lined the vineyard's border, my phone rang. Sophia's name appeared on the screen. Our conversations had become more frequent since that first call when she apologized. They were still careful, tentative, but there was an honesty there that had never existed before. "Elena, I have something to tell you," she said without preamble. "I've been in therapy." "Oh," I said, setting down my brush. "I started going after I read your blog post about family dynamics and artistic expression. The one where you wrote about how creativity requires psychological safety, and how some families are better at cultivating fear than fostering growth." I remembered that post. It had been one of the more personal pieces I'd written, exploring how my own artistic development had been stunted by constantly feeling like I needed to justify my interests and hide my achievements. "The therapist helped me understand some things about myself," Sophia continued. "About why I felt threatened by your success, why I thought I could only be valuable if you were diminished. It wasn't really about you at all. It was about my own insecurity, my fear that being pretty and charming wasn't enough to make me worthwhile." "Sophia, I know this doesn't fix what I did. And I know you've built an amazing life without needing my approval or anyone else's. But I wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming the kind of person who celebrates other people's success instead of feeling threatened by it." We talked for another hour, the longest conversation we'd had since we were children. She told me about her therapy insights, her growing awareness of how toxic family dynamics had shaped both of us in different ways. I shared some of my own discoveries about setting boundaries and choosing which relationships deserved my energy. "Can I ask you something?" she said near the end of the call. "Sure. Would it be okay if I visited sometime? I'd love to see what you've built there. And I promise I'm not asking to insert myself into your life or take credit for anything. I just want to understand who you really are since I realize I never tried to know you before." The request surprised me, but not in an unwelcome way. "I think I'd like that," I said honestly. After we hung up, I returned to my painting with a lighter heart. The conversation had confirmed something I'd been sensing for months, that my work on myself was allowing space for others to grow too. By refusing to remain small and invisible, I'd somehow given Sophia permission to examine her own behavior and make different choices. It reminded me of something one of my conservation professors had said: "When you restore one painting properly, you often inspire better care for an entire collection. Excellence has a way of raising standards around it." I'd spent 28 years believing I was the problem, that I was too much or not enough, that I needed to apologize for my interests and minimize my achievements to make others comfortable. But I wasn't a problem to be solved. I was a work of art that had been obscured by other people's fears and limitations. And now, finally, I was free to restore myself to my intended glory. 6 months later, Sophia did visit Chateau Margaux. She arrived in early spring, when the vineyard was just beginning to show new growth and the workshop was filled with natural light that made everything seem possible. I met her at the train station in Aix-en-Provence, and for the first time in our lives, our hug felt genuine rather than obligatory. She looked different, still beautiful, but in a more natural way. Her hair was shorter, less styled, and she wore simple jeans and a cotton sweater instead of her usual designer outfits. "This is incredible," she said as we drove through the countryside toward the estate. "I looked up your work online, Elena. The blog, the museum collaborations, the university program. I had no idea you'd become so. I mean, I knew you were smart, but I didn't understand what that meant in real terms." "Thank you," I said simply and meant it. The visit lasted a week, and it was unlike any time we'd spent together as adults. Sophia threw herself into learning about the restoration process with the same enthusiasm she'd once reserved for shopping and social events. She asked thoughtful questions about pigment analysis, watched intently as I demonstrated cleaning techniques, and even helped with some of the more routine tasks in the workshop. "I never understood before why you were so passionate about this," she said one afternoon as we worked together to catalog a new shipment of damaged paintings. "I thought it was just old stuff. But watching you work, seeing how you can bring something back to life, it's like watching a surgeon save a patient." On her third day, I took her to meet Dr. Laurent at the Musée d'Orsay. We were delivering a restored Manet drawing, and I thought Sophia might enjoy seeing the behind-the-scenes areas of one of the world's great museums. Dr. Laurent was charmed by Sophia's genuine interest and gave us an extensive tour of the conservation facilities. "Your sister has remarkable intuition about art," she told me privately. She asked very sophisticated questions about our climate control systems and storage protocols. That evening, as we sat on the terrace sharing a bottle of wine from the vineyard, Sophia brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. "I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life," she said. "All these years I've just been existing. Going to parties, dating men who looked good on paper, spending money I didn't earn. I never built anything meaningful." "It's not too late," I said. "I know. And I have an idea, but I want to run it by you first." She took a breath. "I've been researching art therapy programs, using creative expression to help people process trauma, build confidence, develop coping skills. There's a growing field of professionals who work with at-risk youth, veterans with PTSD, elderly people in care facilities." I looked at her with new eyes. "That sounds perfect for you." "Really? You don't think it's too much of a departure from everything I've done before?" "Sophia, you've always been good with people. You have natural empathy and communication skills. And after everything you've learned about yourself in therapy, you'd be able to help others who are struggling with similar issues." I was thinking, maybe I could do some training here? Not to get in your way, but to learn about the technical aspects of art while I'm studying the therapeutic applications. I could help with your summer program, assist with workshops for local schools. The idea excited me more than I'd expected. I think that would be wonderful. Over the next 2 years, Sophia became a regular presence at Chateau Margaux. She split her time between studying art therapy in Paris and working with our programs in Provence. She developed workshops for children dealing with family trauma, using art creation and restoration metaphors to help them understand healing processes. Her first major success was with a group of refugee children who had been relocated to a nearby town. Many of them had experienced significant trauma and struggled with traditional therapy approaches. But Sophia's program, which combined basic art techniques with storytelling and symbolic expression, broke through barriers that other methods hadn't touched. "Art doesn't require perfect language skills," she explained to me after a particularly breakthrough session. A child can express fear or hope or homesickness through color and line even when they don't have words for those feelings in French. Watching Sophia find her calling was like witnessing a different kind of restoration. The superficial approval-seeking person she'd been was gradually being replaced by someone with depth and purpose. She still had her moments of insecurity, still sometimes fell back into old patterns of seeking validation, but the core of who she was becoming was solid and authentic. Our parents, predictably, were baffled by both of our life choices. They visited exactly once, staying for an uncomfortable long weekend during which they criticized everything from the rustic accommodations to our choice to work with charity cases instead of respectable clients. "I don't understand what happened to you girls," Mother said on their last morning, as if we'd contracted some unfortunate disease. "You had every advantage, every opportunity to marry well and live comfortably, and instead you're playing in dirt and finger paints." "We're building something meaningful," Sophia said calmly. "Something that will matter long after we're gone." Father shook his head. "All this talk about meaning and purpose. Sometimes I think your grandmother filled your heads with too many idealistic notions." After they left, Sophia and I sat on the terrace in companionable silence. Finally, she spoke. "I used to think their approval was the most important thing in the world," she said. "But watching them these past few days, seeing how small their vision is, how afraid they are of anything that challenges their narrow idea of success, I feel sorry for them." "Me too," I said. "But I'm grateful they let us here." "How do you mean?" "Their rejection forced us to find out who we really are. If they'd been supportive parents, we might never have discovered our own strength." The third year of the Margot Foundation program brought new challenges and opportunities. We expanded to include a winter session focused on manuscript conservation, as Dr. Du Bois had suggested. The Sorbonne partnership became official, and I found myself splitting time between the estate and Paris, teaching graduate seminars in conservation theory and practice. The recognition was gratifying, but what meant the most to me were the small, personal victories. The student who overcame her fear of making mistakes and completed her first major restoration. The local teenager who discovered a passion for art history through our community workshops. The elderly woman who found new purpose volunteering to help catalog our growing collection of pieces awaiting restoration. Each success reinforced something I'd learned from my grandmother's example. Real wealth isn't measured in money or prestige, but in the positive impact you have on other people's lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Jean-Claude. "Mademoiselle, the morning news says your program has been featured in Le Figaro. They call you the American artist who is revolutionizing art education in Provence. Madame Margot would be so proud." I smiled, adding a stroke of gold to the painting's sky. Grandmother had left me more than property or money. She'd left me permission to claim my own worth, to build something meaningful, to stop apologizing for taking up space in a world that had tried to convince me I didn't belong. The painting was finally finished. It showed the vineyard at sunset, but with layers of meaning that went beyond simple landscape. In the foreground, I'd included subtle details that told the story of transformation. A grapevine that had been pruned and was showing new growth, an old stone wall that had been carefully repaired, tools used for both agriculture and art restoration scattered naturally throughout the scene. At the bottom corner, almost hidden among the painted olive trees, I'd included a small figure, a woman standing at an easel, working on a canvas. It was barely visible unless you knew to look for it, but it was there. A reminder that the true subject of the painting wasn't the landscape, but the person who had found home within it. Outside my window, the Mediterranean breeze moved through the grape leaves with a sound like applause. For the first time in my life, I felt like I deserved it.